What's up, guys? Welcome to the GamerMD83 Podcast. I'm GamerMD83, and I'm joined with Mr. Nick Sadler.
That's me.
That's me. But this is, we finally are starting the podcast that we've been talking about for so long. We're really excited to finally get this started and talk about the stuff that we're so passionate about. Particularly video games. Yes. For those of you that don't know who we are or who I am or what my channel is, I'm GamerMD83, as I said. You could call me MD. And I make video game reviews and information videos and just fun videos in general, sharing my enthusiasm for games and the industry on my YouTube channel, also called GamerMD83. I've been doing this for about 7 years now. And I'm starting to push myself more into streaming on Twitch and now this podcast, which is something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time.
As someone that's known you and followed you for a very long time, I think it's a natural evolution for the kind of stuff that you're delivering to people. And I think it's to be a part of this, it's a great privilege for me.
Oh, dude, no, thank you for being part of it. I think what I want to capture with this podcast between Nick and I is the conversation aspect of a podcast, because there's just something special about a conversation, I think, between two nerds especially, nerding out about the stuff that we love.
Nerding out about anything. I mean, I don't doubt that there's someone listening to this who has... as a nerd, you play your cards pretty close to your chest. And, when you tip your hand to let somebody else see, and it turns out that they're interested in the same things, and you nerd out, it's one of the greatest social experiences that you can have. And, hopefully the kind of conversations are going to be stimulating the same kind of reaction, nerding out the same way, and, just keeping these kind of interests alive, really.
Mm-hmm. But before we get started, Nick, please tell the lovely people who you are, for those of you that don't know who he is.
So I'm Nick. If you've seen MD's videos and Twitch streams, I will crash the party occasionally and inflict my opinions on you. But I'm an artist in the video games industry. I've worked in AAA for Sony and for EA for the last 15 years. After spending far too long at school. And I'm just about to, I have just embarked on a brand new adventure into a different kind of video game with improbable worlds. And it's all very exciting. Yeah. As it says on my Twitter profile, pluviophile, a motorist and a golfist, and I'm addicted to motoring and golfing. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
And for those of you that don't know what the fancy word pluviophile means, it means that he loves that rain dough.
That rain. I love rain. Do you know, I think growing up in England, if the rain doesn't make you mad, you'll fall in love with it. And I fell in love with it. And as it goes, over the last few years of working at BioWare, I've managed to weave that into a good portion of my work. And it's very satisfying.
It looks good.
It looks good, but beyond rain, I love the smell of it. I love the sound of it.
It's refreshing.
Yeah.
Not that us Southern Californians would even know what it is, but I've read.
And for those paying attention, it is somewhat at odds with my love of golf, because I don't like playing golf in rain. But I'm talking about myself already. It's someone else's podcast, and I have invaded the airwaves, and here I am talking about myself.
The goal, though.
That goal, though.
So I think we should get started with the podcast and with our theme, with our first topic.
So we've done the token introductions, but I think the meat of the issue is in what games set your spirit on fire. every story with a love affair of video games starts with the one that kicked it all off.
Mm-hmm. As a little kid sitting in front of a TV, most likely.
Was that what it was for you?
Yeah. I think for me, it's difficult to actually nail the point where I started to become a gamer, where it was like, yeah, that was my beginning, or that was my origin stories. I kind of have too many, like Batman. But because I remember having the Atari, I don't really remember playing it, but I know we had it. And then I think the point where I knew that I really liked video games was when we got Mario Brothers 3. That game, you know, when you just have something ingrained in your brain and whenever somebody asks you, like, what's your favorite game of all time or something, it always just pops in your head because it's like the first memory that you have. For me, it's Mario Brothers 3. I remember when my brother got it. I remember driving home with it. I remember opening it and wanting to just look at it and touch it. I remember playing it for the first time. But I never beat it. Gaming was always like, I was always the observer, which is kind of weird. Like I was always watching my older brother play because I guess I was too young and I just wasn't too good at it or something. But I loved watching my brother play. And I think the moment where I actually started to become a gamer, where I was like, yes, this is what I want to do, was when my dad got me the Sega Genesis.
Nice.
Yeah, it was for my birthday. I think I was like 10 or 11, something like that. And the game that he got me, my first game that was actually mine, was The Lion King. That was the first game I ever beat. And it felt amazing because it was a difficult game. It was challenging for my age, at least. And it was where I felt that playing these games for myself was awesome.
Plus, it was the first game that was all yours.
Yeah, it was all mine on a console that was all mine because all of the Nintendo systems were all of... those were all my brothers. I don't think I ever owned a Nintendo system besides like a Game Boy or something like that. They were always my brothers. I think the GameCube was my younger brother's, but the Sega Genesis was mine. It's not my favorite console, but it's definitely a special one. It's where it all began, I think, for me, really.
See, my position in this story is that of the older brother. My wonderful little sister is she's 2.5 years younger than me, and I was the first through the wall, but typical with me, it takes me a while to realize what I've experienced and, the opportunities that it can give me. Mm-hmm. My very first video games experience was at somebody's house, and my godparents' house, actually. And it was on a BBC Micro, would have been in about 1983, 1984. But that was a very rudimentary game. I don't remember it having much colour. But it was fun enough to play, but like I said, I didn't realise what it was really, and never experienced computer games or video games again for years, simply because in those days hardly anyone could afford a computer. But I got some friends and they got computers, and I was around at their house annoying them, asking them, begging them to play. But and then I got my own C64. Developed a bit of a joystick problem, ruining joysticks, and then I'd have to buy another one. And then, you grow up another couple of years and another friend gets a Sega Mega Drive. And I think that was one of the most impactful moments. I think, we'll probably get into this in a bit more depth, but one of the most important video gaming experiences for me was just sitting with my jaw open watching Sonic the Hedgehog 1 being played by somebody else. And wanting that for myself, I'd heard all kinds of chatter about Sonic. The chatter was about the level select cheat, up, down, left, right, A and start. And I knew that before I'd even seen the game, which was weird. And then a couple of Christmases later got my own. And there's, there are brilliant stories attached to, those two. Like my mum, when she would buy us Christmas presents, she was really smart with hiding Christmas presents. And she would hide them in plain sight.
Oh, so, nice. You would never even guess it was there. It's like, yeah, no, she would never.
until I did guess that it was there. So I'm admitting this for the first time publicly ever since 1992. There was a pile of clothes washing in our kitchen. Yeah. And she hid a bag, and there was a Genesis with Sonic 1 and 2 pads, and that was the package. And there was Sonic 2 loose in the same bag.
Yeah.
And I found it. And just one night, woke up in the middle of the night, went down, stole Sonic 2 out of the bag. I traced Sonic with tracing paper because I just wanted to draw him, and put it back and did my best to leave it alone for the next 3 weeks until Christmas morning. And I was up maybe 1 minute past acceptable o'clock on Christmas morning that year because it's just so damn excited to play that game. So excited.
Aww. I would have loved to see your face when you found it.
Oh, dude, it was incredible, absolutely incredible. But within a few minutes, Win and I were both playing Sonic 2 Versus. It was brilliant.
Nice. The difference between you getting the Sega Genesis and me was I had heard of it, I knew about it, I knew about Sonic, but I never asked for it. Like, it wasn't something that I was seeking out. With the Genesis, they were kind of aiming to an older audience, and the Nintendo was more for my age, I think, in that time. So I really wasn't considering it. It was always just an idea of that, oh yeah, my brother will eventually get it, and then I'll play it. But I was a huge Lion King fan when it came out. I was like, oh, in love with that movie. I wanted everything Lion King. And my dad saw that they had the game for the Genesis. So my dad, being the lovely person that he was, got the game and the console so that I could play the game, and gave it to me on my birthday. And I was like, it was one of the coolest surprises because I wasn't expecting it. I never asked for it, but it was amazing when I got it. I never knew what that feeling would be like to actually get a video game that was mine and a console that was mine. And obviously my dad kind of wanted to solve the whole fights between my older brother and I, because it was like, can I play? No, I want to play. And, so he gave me this new console, which was really, really cool because now my brother was like, oh, him being the older brother, he kind of liked how Sonic looked and he kind of wanted to play my game,
right?
But he didn't. Now I was like, no, you play your Nintendo and I'm gonna play my Sega Genesis. And then I did end up getting Sonic 2 afterwards, which was very different from anything I had ever played. Very fast, a different challenge on its own. But yeah, I think it was my dad. He had this intuition or this instinct inside him telling him, give her this console, she's going to do great things in the future.
So on that subject, it's kind of a subject that's out there in the ether now, and there are a lot of people chattering and discussing it. Was there a notion of gender with who got what or in what order things were bought? Did any of that go through your minds?
No, the thing for me, my dad was a huge influence for me when it came to gaming because there was definitely this stereotype, right? I think it's less now, but back then it was always like, oh, video games are for boys, especially, my mom's mentality. She was always like, oh, why do you play those things? They're for boys. You should be more into girly things. And I growing close to my dad and between two brothers, it was like, I want to play. I as much as I did play with Barbies, I played with my brother's Hot Wheels as well, and my older brother's video games. But just knowing that my dad was okay with me playing, and actually playing with us, Street Fighter, and then him getting me the console, this awesome black console. My dad loved black as well, so I think he kind of thought it was cool. I think just knowing that my dad was okay with it, And even my mom knowing that that he was okay with it, it just became okay. It was like, okay, fine, whatever. And I thought it was cool. I was like, okay, cool. You know, I have my dad's blessing. It's totally fine. There's nothing preventing me from playing these games. There's no law or rule that I can't play this game, or that I can't have my own console, or, you know, that I can't enjoy these games as much as I do, you know, even though my mom didn't like it too much. Just being able
Right.
to share that with my dad and my brothers, and it being acceptable was, I think, something that helped me grow up in a way that I never really discriminated with that kind of stuff when it came to gaming. Like, it was never gender was never a thing for me.
You know, it's strange listening to you talk about that just then. Like, there's a little bit of role reversal with
Oh,
my
really?
parents. Well, my mum's the gardener, right? And her dad was the miller. So they were all very hands-on. Plus, my mum was the middle child, like you. And she had to fight up and fight down. So, but then, you know, my dad was the elder brother. He's very much the artist, pianist and organist. So he had a very different sensibility and sensitivity to that kind of method of expression. But, you know, I studied music as well when I was younger, and he and I played golf together. So I had outlets that he was perfectly happy encouraging. And, you know, when I went on to develop the visual arts side and learn to express that way, both of my parents were absolute angels, encouraging all that kind of stuff. And, you know, recently, career-wise, I kind of stood at the precipice of a fairly large decision when I resigned from BioWare. And, you know, it ultimately boiled down to not wanting to disappoint my dad, which is a weird thing because he passed 5.5 years ago now. And, you know, for all of the encouragement, I had to find a way that, you know, I could work and express in a manner that would please him. And please my mum, and please, you know, any mentor and teacher that I've had. You know, I still hold myself to the microscope. But in terms of the engendering of video games in our family, there was nothing of the kind. You know, when I think we had very video gamey Christmases when I was young. You know, when I got the Genesis or the Mega Drive, Wynn got the Game Boy. And, you know, a couple of Christmases later, I got a Game Gear. She got something else, I think. She got something computery. So there was always parity. There was always balance. To live through that period, and for one sibling to get a Genesis and the other sibling to get a Game Boy. And that we had that Christmas where in one corner of the room there was Chemical Plant Zone, and in the other end there was Tetris Music A. You know, you can't... those days will never ever come again, I'm sure.
And, I mean, you never know, because even to this day, I think you and I, we love, you know, we're so connected with our gaming past, even now. You know, it's such a big part of us now, more like, I think for me more so than it was in the past few years, that we just love receiving. You know, I think your sister gave you a Game Boy, what was it, 2 years ago? And that's just amazing.
You're not wrong. It was just because I know people are dying to know. It was 2016. No, 2017.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And it was an original Game Boy in an original Game Boy case
Cool.
with 5 or 6 cartridges, including the cartridges that we played when we were young. So, Krusty Super Funhouse, Tetris, Bart Simpson's Escape from Camp Deadly,
So cool.
Kirby's Dream Land. The 6 golden coins as well. Mario 2. But they, you know, playing them again years later, it's very moving. But she did exactly the same thing a Christmas before that. She bought me a Commodore 64C. But you know, that's my sister, right? She picks the perfect birthday and Christmas presents out.
It's that same, the memories come back, the feeling comes back, you know. Again, you know, we're talking so much about your sister, but she knows how to how to
evoke those moments. I think.
yeah,
You know?
like she gave me a watch. This what was it for my birthday, I think.
Yeah.
This watch, and I didn't expect anything like it, but it was a watch, and it was a Game Boy, a little Game Boy watch, and it would I didn't think it would play any music, but when the alarm sounds, it plays one of the Mario Brothers songs, like a really old one. I think it was like Mario Brothers 2 or something. I can't remember which one it was now, but I had tears in my eyes because I was just so blown away by the feeling that I was getting, because it was like, oh my God, I hadn't heard that song since I was a kid, and it's I love that those beginnings that we had they can still come back to us. They're still a part of us. It's really, really good. I love it.
I mean, it's talking about retro experiences. It's almost certainly something we can come back to in a future podcast. But I think those feelings, that they stack up as some of the most important memories and important moments in our lives, certainly in our generation. I remember people because of those memories.
Yeah, me too.
And they're very super significant. So all of this talk of the past, we're talking 20, 25 years ago. And the reason that we're here is that those feelings and those thoughts are still powerful, and they still compel us to play video games. So what's on the menu today for you?
It's funny because the games that I used to play in the past were very much platformers. And as of, I think when I played Mass Effect was the first RPG game that I played. And I just fell in love with it because it offered so many options and so much choice that I didn't think was available. So that's when I really started to love RPGs, and I was like, I want more of this. I want to create my own character and all this stuff. So I really got into games like that. And till maybe 2 years ago, I think it was like around 2016, when I started to not stop loving those games. I still love them. But I started to go back to platformers, which I had just kind of left behind. I kind of wanted more of a cinematic experience. I wanted more of a narrative. I was following more story type games. And as of recently, I'm going more towards gameplay now, which is funny because I as much as I always loved the gameplay in games, I preferred a story to follow. Like I preferred, because I love writing, and it was my way of, it was a very interactive way of almost writing a story.
Do you feel that that's a reaction to how video games are now, a reaction to your more personal circumstances, or do you think it's just instinct? You want something that's a little bit more dessert and, less 7-course meal? You want something fast?
I think it's a little bit of everything, because if we look at the year that I started to feel this, towards 2016, I think it was, a lot of video games, a lot of indies started to reintroduce pixel art. We started to get, and it slowly started to get introduced again. Like Cave Story, Undertale, Kingdom, Hyper Light Drifter. You started to see these gorgeous pixel art games, and I think the thing that attracted me to them were not just the vision, that it was, it kind of reminded me of the past, where I was like, oh wow, it looks like a NES game or a SNES game, or a SNES game, as some of you call it. But also the pixel art was not just pixels, but a very beautiful way of playing with the pixels. Like Kingdom, on the Switch, I got it on the Switch. Kingdom, New Lands, I believe it's called. is absolutely gorgeous. And it blows my mind that it's so simple, just pixels, but you get reflections in the water, and you get the sunrises and the sunsets are just absolutely gorgeous. And then you get games like Hyper Light Drifter that are just a masterpiece. You know, the colors they use, they're very limited in the color scheme, but they're just so beautiful to look at. I think that was one of the things that got me most, back into these types of games, was the visual aspect of it and how intriguing they were. But also, so the availability definitely was a part of it. But I think also my tastes were changing. I kind of wanted something quicker, but just as fulfilling, but not so much, so much story, so much cinematic, so much reading and all this stuff. I just wanted something. I just wanted to go from level 1 to level whatever.
Understood. It's kind of strange. You mentioned Cave Story turning up in whenever it was, 2015. Cave Story, I think originally it was a PC game and it came out, I think, in 2004. So it's very much a kind of fashion. And I don't say that to kind of correct the point. I say that to highlight the notion that you can be working on a certain thing, or you can be waiting for a certain thing, and you've still got to wait for the fashion for that thing to come round and sweep it up and bring other games or other films along with it, right? Superhero films have been bubbling away for decades, but it's only now that Marvel have made such a clean sweep, generating hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars, that everyone wants in on it now. That there is a fashion for pixel art platformers now, I think is magnificent, because developing that kind of game is so much more accessible. You don't have to compromise your vision for constraints of the platform anymore. You don't have to crush your game down onto a cartridge. You can have a gigabyte download and it can look like a 1980s or 1990s platformer, but sound like a very modern piece of entertainment. I absolutely think it's wonderful.
That merging, again, I think that's a good topic for another podcast, but the merging of today and then, back then and now, in these games that are coming out in like Hyper Light Drifter, you get a very pixel art experience, but the music that they add to it and the color schemes and the music is very synthy but yet very it sounds like an orchestra, and the way that they tell a story, they're just pictures. So they leave it to you to try to figure out what's going on and what this all means. It's a very artistic game. And, Crossing Souls as well. Oh, God, I love that game so much. The type of score that it has, the soundtrack is very... it sounds like John Williams or something like that, like one of those like E.T. or those games from or those movies from the 80s.
The Goonies and
the Goonies,
Karate Kid, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's all pixel art. You don't get this MIDI sound to it like you would in those times. It's kind of a mesh again of different styles. And with Fox and Forests, it's just one, the music is very much from the past. They're not bad. Like, they're good, and they're kind of like an earworm, and that you just kind of keep humming it over and over and over, even though you keep hearing it over and over. But they incorporate really interesting game mechanics, the changing of seasons, and it's another way of, even though the music keeps repeating, sometimes they use music to make it easy for you to repeat because the music changes and it's just really good, like Not a Hero, one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard. I think it's very repetitive, the gameplay. You go through again and again to try to get the achievements, but the music is just so good.
Well, I think when the when that gameplay loop, because if you're not familiar with Not a Hero, it is a pixel art platformer. There's one main objective for every level, but there are 3 extra objectives that allows for replayability, and the completionist playthrough, you've got to tick all 4 boxes on every level to feel to feel complete as a human being. But those loops, when you're getting it wrong, and the game is structured so that you know that you're getting it wrong early, so you'll reset the level very quickly. But the game loops are a minute, 90 seconds long, and the music tracks are 4.5 minutes long, so you don't get a lot of overlap. And there's no annoying kind of intros to the music that you have to sit through. You know, the music will loop in the background, and then the game plays out over the front of it. And it's a great way of doing it. And, you know, similarly to what you were saying regarding Hyper Light Drifter, it's not a soundtrack or a score that is limited by 25-year-old hardware specs. You know, these games are love letters to what those games used to be.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
By using that visual style, using that audio style, I don't think it's any accident that you choose to use that to convey these kind of experiences. You know, this is aimed at a very specific audience. You know, the 16, 17-year-olds today are playing Black Ops and you know, Halo, and or you know, what's all of the other kind of big biceps and massive Fortnite, Overwatch, Gears, and they're entitled to it, and they'll enjoy it. But they weren't alive when, you know, these games had been out for 10 years before these guys and girls were born, and it's not for them. You know, if they play those games, you've got to have exposure to what came before to actually fully appreciate them for what they are, and you know, a love letter to the original pixel art. I think that's where my mind's at these days.
Yeah, same here. You know, you've got the teens with the battle arena games, which are fun as well, but they're big for that specific age group. And then you've got the little kids, you know, as young as you could imagine, they're already with their parents' phone or tablet, and they're swiping away and finding their way to the games and stuff, and it's just crazy to me. But then you've got the older gamer, you know, like you and I, and like all you older gamers that grew up with the Nintendo or the Genesis. We grew up with controllers in our hands. And these games, the resurgence of pixel art games, I think are definitely geared to any gamer, but I think more so to the gamer like us that grew up with that, with those playing those games, because they're definitely playing on the nostalgia of it. They know that we will appreciate those games in a different way because they mean something else. They evoke definitely a different feeling for us because it's the type of games that we grew up with, yet in an advanced form, you know, where it's like, whoa, you know, we definitely saw games similar to this when we were kids, but not with this type of music or with these types of controls.
Agreed. I mean, you know, I won't deny that this style of game still appeals to me. I mean, I collect vintage consoles and games and, you know, original copies as best as I can. And I still play them. I've got modern equipment, like, you know, I have the Retron. I've even got again, another one of my sister's presents, which is, it's kind of like a cell phone holder that you clip into, but it's got a Game Boy cartridge slot on its back. So you can turn your phone into a Game Boy. And it's absolutely remarkable. And given that someone who will remain nameless twisted my arm and forced me to buy a Nintendo Switch last year, I found that there's not only an amazing array of games for it, but, and this, I don't want this to sound like an advert, there's an amazing array of games everywhere. It's the world we live in now. But for the Switch specifically, there are certain things that the Switch suits that psychologically, and it's so stupid to think like this, but you've got the big, powerful AAA machines like the PlayStation 4 Pro that are capable of playing amazing things like Horizon Zero Dawn and God of War and you know, the Uncharted series with beautiful visuals, very high fidelity sound, and you know, they are the big, expensive, emotional AAA experiences that the Sonys, the EAs, and the Microsofts need us to play. Meantime, you have a very, very vibrant store on the Switch that Nintendo seem to be very, very happy to stock with Neo Geo games and Genesis games and, all kinds of things. But also this modern retro stuff. I've had my Switch, I guess, about a year now. A little over a year, maybe. And it's the perfect home for stuff like Cave. One of the first cartridge I bought for it was Cave Story.
Yeah.
I'm playing Lumines like a beast right now because I adore that game. But there's a remastered version just come out. Not strictly speaking retro or pixel art, but it is in that kind of puzzle game Tetris-y mold. Fox and Forest is gorgeous. Sounds, looks, plays beautifully if you've not seen it. Hollow Knight is stunning. Yeah. Hyperlight Drifter is quite literally a life changer for me.
Yeah, oh god. And it just came out for the Switch, which was something we were waiting for because it was like, oh my god, it's its home. That's its home.
Well, and another excuse to play through it again, and another excuse to give Heart Machine money.
Absolutely.
I discovered that they did limited edition vinyl pressings of the soundtrack. So, both MD and I have a copy of that. Yeah. We've both got copies of the Japanese release with its
gorgeous.
box art. Because it's a thing that's worth having, and it's a sector of the industry, and it's a sector of the market that I adore, and I don't want it to disappear because people shun it. If you have the Overwatch or the Fortnite generation saying screw these games because they belong 25 years ago, I don't want that to be the fate for this stuff. I want to keep it going. So I really have no problem giving these companies money if I love what they make.
Definitely. I'm a strong believer that the more diversity and the more competition that is in the industry, the healthier it is.
Well, there's got to be something for everyone. A lot of companies fall into the trap of trying to make one game that is good for all. And you write for one person. You don't write for a million. You write for one, and then a million people can see themselves in that story or see themselves in that character. And, as long as there is a vibrant market, as you say, and a diverse market, I think there's got to be backing for a diverse array of games because, these games of these style, I love them. They give me pleasure.
Me too.
So here we are, 3/4 of the way through our first podcast, and for fear of making it not sound like an interview, I'll phrase this exactly like an interview question, and then it'll be like a double bluff. So we've spoken at length about your origin stories, and I almost think that you could use video games as kind of like a barometer to measure how you've changed as an individual. How have you changed between your early gaming experiences and what you look to video games for now?
Oh gosh, I've changed so much. Not just because of the games I play, but because of how I play them now. Obviously, technology available now makes me play them differently. With the Switch, you can now play portable again, but at the same time on the TV as well if you want. The technology is very exciting because it's allowing gaming to just keep evolving, which is awesome. But I think my mentality when playing games is very different now because of what I do on YouTube. When I started YouTube, I didn't really start a gaming channel. I started just like a skits and vlog channel. And I eventually found myself kind of running out of ideas, and I was like, I don't know what to do. So I just started to I made a video on the games that I had. And I found myself not just showing my games where I was like, okay, yeah, these are the games that I have. No, I would get a game and then I'd have a story to tell about that. And then I'd have a story to tell about this other game. And it turned out to be this huge video. And I was like, why don't I just make my channel on video games? I think my first channel was called Gone with MD83, and I just changed it to GamerMD83 because I was like, that's my passion. That's what I could talk years about. So I started to talk about video games and just the passion that I had for it. But as time went by, as years went by, I've been doing this for 7 years now. And recently, in the past 2 years, like I said, when the way that I played games and the games that I would play started changing, going back to the more simple. Not saying that these games are simple, but the pixel art type stuff, the more nostalgic things. I don't know if it has anything to do with YouTube, because I analyze these games so much, especially the cinematic experiences and the games with the huge stories. I've analyzed them so much, and I've talked about them for so long, and I review every aspect of them, that I kind of just want to enjoy games for what they are. I kind of just want to sit down and play a game and not think too much about it. Not every game has more to it than just a simple premise and just getting from here to there, just save the princess.
Right. Because you've always got to save the princess,
You always have to save the princess.
What's the point of video games if there's no princess?
I want to save Mario one day. I think that would be funny for Mario to get captured and then Peach has to go save him.
Nintendo, make it happen.
Yeah, do it. But yeah, I think I've changed a lot. I don't know. I think it's a mix of why I've changed, definitely what I do, and I think I'm curious to hear you talk about it because you're a developer, and I want to know how it's changed you, or how you view gaming as a developer and a gamer.
So I guess it's difficult to explain because working in games development, there are a lot of things that kind of factor into it. Well, I guess it starts long before, right? I started developing art skills when I was about 11 or 12, and I showed some aptitude towards it. And being born into British schools in the 80s and 90s, going through high school in the 90s, there are not a lot of CAD computers available, specifically at that time in British history. Public schools simply did not have funding so that every child could have a PC.
Right.
So pens are cheap, paper is cheap, pencils and paints are cheap. Chicken wire and paper mache are cheap. So drawing, painting, sculpting, illustration, not even photography at that stage. That was my start. And transitioning into digital would be very difficult to avoid. And I didn't avoid it. I was, yes, passionate about being an artist and carving out a niche for myself as a commercial artist. But at the same time, you have to be dynamic to what is not only on offer from schools and universities, but also where your skills need to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now.
Right.
Yes, you can make a name for yourself if you dig your heels in and, stay with traditional media as an artist. There is always a market for illustration. And I think just in the same way that retro games have come back into the video games market, I am sure that people are going to get bored of CG movies, and there's, traditional animation will see a real return to form through that kind of,
that would be cool.
Fashionable move.
Yeah.
But getting into game dev, commercial art was a big dream, and my tastes changed greatly once I became a professional. I wanted to play the big sophisticated games. I wanted to play the new benchmarks. And interest in retro stuff does wane. Well, you feel obliged to keep track of that stuff. If you skip through my career about 10 years and I start at BioWare, working on stuff like Inquisition,
right,
and then Mass Effect Andromeda, and now Anthem more recently, it's a very different prospect. Inquisition was a very difficult project for everybody involved. We on the environment art team had a far easier run of it than a lot of other departments, mostly because Frostbite, and not to talk too much about Frostbite, but Frostbite's big advantages are in rendering. It's a beautiful renderer of artwork. So we were able to make our artwork sing. And that's where I found my niche, in actually, trying to insist on high visual quality. But that was a project that was difficult by our choice. We were massaging and polishing artwork that we knew was already pretty successful, and we were pushing it from a 9 to a 9.5.
Right.
Occasionally to a 10. And we got Game of the Year hundreds of times over for our troubles. And that isn't to diminish any of the contributions of any of the other teams, who without doubt had a much harder task. Andromeda and Anthem were far more difficult for very different reasons for me. And I get home from work and I am weeping because of the, just because of the strain I put myself under. I wanted to achieve certain levels of quality, make sure that we weren't breaking the engine to try to get artwork in. And it was very tiring, exhausting even. Anthem, I had a tough time on Anthem, but that's for a future memoir. The bottom line to all of this is, when you're working on very sophisticated AAA material at work, when you come home, it's the last thing in my mind to want to play similar stuff.
Right.
For me, growing up, video games was the antithesis to homework. It was the antithesis to the academic obligation to succeed. It was how I relaxed, how I put my mind to work on other things. Ultimately, to get that same release now, I couldn't play anything that was, of a similar kind of game to the stuff that I was working on. So I think, in a very, very long, windy, roundabout way, that's how I've changed, I think, between back then and now. And it's a similar route, or it's a similar journey to yours.
Yeah.
We both started with pixel art platformers when they were fresh, new, and stretching that hardware as much as they could. And we've gone towards narrative-led stuff. For me, it was first-person shooters. It was Half-Life and Unreal, that kind of thing. And for you, it was the more story-driven stuff. But we've both migrated back to our childhoods, it seems.
Yeah, they're kind of just... I guess we're just old.
Well, speak for yourself.
Yeah, we just kind of want to relax and play something small. It's like, oh God, I don't have time for this.
I mean, it's just a fascinating subject to think of. Like,
it is, yeah.
Am I changing? Is the market changing?
Yeah.
Were they truly my formative years? Is that really what I think of a video game as?
Yeah.
Is that where my lizard brain runs to when I need to unwind? I don't know.
Am I maturing? Am I immaturing? What is it?
Yeah, quite. Are we evolving? Are we devolving?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I don't know. A discussion for a future podcast, perhaps. So before you put your books and your pencils away and you put your chair upside down on your desk and we let you go home, there's something that I think provides a natural conclusion to the kind of conversation that we've had today. And, we've danced around the topic. We've been to the past, we've come up to the present, and we're probably thinking of future games too. But what would you say was that video game which has had the most profound effect on your life?
Obviously, when you're asked the horrible question, what's your favorite game of all time? It's like, how dare you make me choose just one? There's so many for so many reasons. But when it comes to the most important, or the one that I feel was the most, when it comes to the one that was the most important to me, I could definitely say without thinking too long about it, that it was, like I said before, Lion King, when I mentioned that was the game that I beat for the first time, and that was the first game that was actually mine. It's definitely the point where I think, in those days I didn't think about it like that. I didn't think, yes, I've become a gamer. But now I look back and I go, yeah, that's where I became a gamer, because I knew what it was to beat a game. I knew what it was to own a game, take care of it, take care of my console, and look for games for my console. It was when I started to buy games from the money that my dad would give us for every Sunday, every $2, $5, or every time we would do some chores, get our money and save up, or for Christmases, I'd be collecting games for my console because I was like, well, I've got this console, time to get some games. So it was definitely Lion King because that's where it all kicked off, I think.
Right, so it literally is your origin story.
Yeah, I think so. The Lion King, and I'm totally fine with that because it was a huge time in my life actually falling in love with everything that was the Lion King, and for it to be the first game that I beat, I think is pretty cool.
I think being a video games professional, it's like there's a very different bias for me, or a very different leaning. Like the most important game for me, and what is the most profound effect games have had on my life, as a developer or as a gamer? I mean,
as both.
I don't think there is as both. I think there is for each.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like for each.
Right. Like, so 2 stories then, I guess. I mean, the most profound for me was definitely Sonic the Hedgehog as a player. That was the one that really and truly woke me up. Within the same 5-year or even 2-year period, to go from a 16 colour palette, probably not even that with the Commodore 64, to a huge luxurious colour palette of whatever it was for the Genesis, 120 colours or something, I don't know, with not having to choose between sounds and music. It was amazing and stimulating, but also seductive. I saw Sonic the Hedgehog being played by a friend, and I had to have this.
Yeah.
And then I got it, and it was all I did. It was leverage for my parents. Don't play games until you've done your homework. Yes, fine. I will do my homework, and then I will play this. And but then, as a developer, the most influential game, the most important game for me was Dragon Age Inquisition. Since I'd started studying to become an artist, there was always a hoop to jump through. I got my bachelor's when I was 22, and I got my master's when I was 24, and then started working at Sony. But even then, there was always a hoop to jump through. You start as a trainee, you work hard until someone says, don't be a trainee anymore, you can be a junior now. And then you work as a junior until you are an artist, and then you work as an artist until you are a senior, and then until you are a lead. And Dragon Age Inquisition for me was the most influential because it was so successful. Critically, it was a great team that came together at the right moment in their careers. We worked on the right tech at the time, for the right platforms at the time, and we won Game of the Year. It was immensely liberating for me because there was no longer that mythical thing that I had to achieve as part of a team, because we'd achieved it and we knew what it took. Then, I focused more on making that experience easier to achieve for our art teams. It's cemented in my mind that it's worth fighting for those kind of things. For me, fighting for those kind of things professionally. Yeah.
Nice. And I could see it because, a lot of people, like you were saying, the last thing you kind of want to do when you get home after creating, working on this huge AAA title, is kind of just relax and play something that just fulfills you in different ways. But I know, because I've seen it, that Dragon Age Inquisition is actually a very a special game to you, because I've seen you play it and you still go back to it and you still enjoy it. So it's definitely not one of those situations, where it's like a lot of people they can't play their own work because they're criticizing it constantly or whatever. With Dragon Age Inquisition, I see that you have so many good memories and so much inspiration with that game that it just brings you, it brings a smile to your face.
Well, it brings me back often.
Yeah, so I could definitely see it, and I could appreciate it as well, because it was, I mean, we'd talk when you were working on that game, and I just remember the how inspired you were, and how the late nights as well. We'd be talking while you were still, it was like 11 o'clock at night, and you were still in the office, and we'd be talking or watching some kind of baking show or cooking show,
or there'd be,
while you worked.
I'd magically appear on a Twitch stream of yours. Important days for me, definitely. So that's pretty much it. Be sure to check the description for all the lovely ways to...
I do the outro. This is the GamerMD83 podcast, and I'm GamerMD83.
Well, I'll be over here if you need me.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Be sure to check the description for all the ways to keep in touch. Stuff like YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.